So hello everybody and welcome to the August 2021 edition of Fiction Fix online. This event is being live streamed to the Finger on the Pulse, which is the Facebook group for Fiction Fix online, and the Zoom video will be posted afterwards on my Helen Claire Gould channel on YouTube. So please subscribe and point all your friends to it. And if you wish to join the Finger on the Pulse, please request to do so. There are a few rules to review and some questions to answer, but the group is for both readers and listeners. At our Fiction Fix live events, there's always a books table. We can't do that with Fiction Fix online, obviously, but authors reading this afternoon, please do post your book details in the chat. If you have a website, include that and a link to the ebook or to the seller for the print version. Prices would be helpful and an ISBN or a SIN if you have it. On Amazon Kindle, the SIN should take readers straight to the book. And this can be done at the end or at any time during the show while you're not reading. And I will post it with the live stream and video or in the comments below it. And it will also go onto my website and anywhere else I can think of putting it. Okay, so now please unmute for a moment. If you have muted, your hands are required to do some work. So Colin will kick off with the latest instalment of his ongoing fantasy series. So please put your hands together for Colin A Brett and Mylo.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Previously, in earlier excerpts, our hero Mylo has struck up a relationship with a young girl called Callie, and Callie risks a small fortune to allow Mylo to win a dice game. Another character, good wife Agnes Bamber, also put in an appearance. And then the following morning, after all of the dice games and shenanigans from that, Mylo and Callie decide to take a ride out from the village. "Where are we going, Mylo?" Callie asked. "Home," he replied, sort of. They crested the rise and saw the ruins of the farm. "What is this place? What happened here?" "It's my parents' farm," Mylo said. He pointed in the direction of the main farmhouse. "That was where I was born. My dad said that my mother's screams could be heard in the next valley." He nudged the horse down the rise, through where the gate should have been, and drew to a halt in the yard. Mylo slid from the saddle and helped Callie to the ground. The girl stood looking around at the devastation. "The landlord said he took you in when you were 6, she said quietly. "This happened 10 years ago?" Mylo nodded. Even 10 years of natural regrowth and weather damage had not blunted the edges from the destruction she could see. "And was that a blood stain on the remains of a wall?" "They came out of the north, just beyond those trees," Mylo began. 24 orcs against 5 adults and me. It all came in a rush then, and Mylo couldn't stop it. My mother pushed me into the woodshed, which used to be over there. Then she left me so the orcs wouldn't suspect she had hidden something. I saw our 3 farm hands die back to back. The biggest weapons we had were hatchets, and were no match for the orcs with swords, axes, and clubs almost as long as you are tall. Dad was bludgeoned to the ground and smashed to a pulp, it seemed. And my mother, well, I think she was smart enough to take her own life before the orcs had a chance to brutalize her. "Sweet Lady Alora," Callie whispered, her breath forming a cloud in front of her face as she invoked the name of her homeland's matron goddess. "So you see, I know how you feel," Mylo managed, his voice hoarse as he stifled the tears. "At least your men took some of the raiders down with them. My folk never had a chance." Callie walked the short distance to Mylo and reached out to take his hands. He flinched at her touch and looked up into her eyes. "You know the worst of it? I couldn't do a bloody thing to help. They died as I watched and cried silent tears." Callie hugged Mylo, and this time he did not flinch away from her touch. She felt the silent sobs rack his body. "I was a coward, Callie. I still am." "You were not a coward, Mylo. A 6-year-old boy could have done nothing against those savages. Even our trained soldiers lost. And you're no coward now, because coming back here was the bravest thing you could have done." Mylo straightened and reluctantly withdrew from the warmth of Callie's embrace. He looked the girl in the eyes and saw nothing but a sympathy and a shared pain. Silence between the two was broken by a long groan, which broke off into a racking cough. Mylo was shocked out of his grief and firmly pushed Callie behind him. He drew the knife he had been using in the stables earlier that day. This, together with a slingshot Mylo occasionally used to bring down wood pigeons and pheasants, comprised the only weapons he had brought to protect Callie and himself. Mylo looked back at Callie. "Stay put," he mouthed, and pointed at the ground at the girl's feet. Then he turned and walked towards the ruins of the farmhouse. Callie reached up and took the horse's reins, but she was damned if she would flee and leave Mylo in danger. Fear clouded her mind and threatened to send her to the ground in a dead faint. But such emotions were not ladylike. Her mothers and tutors would have scolded, and she would not surrender to that fear. Instead, she concentrated on Mylo and marveled at the softness of his footfalls and the all but silent progress he made towards the ruins. "Breathe slowly," Mylo reminded himself. "Scan the ground ahead. Each step forward might be your last if you fuck this up, boy." His boss's words, drummed into him through hours of training, echoed around Mylo's thoughts. He covered the distance with ease and noticed that the blood on the old wall was fresh, not 10 years old. The red stain glistened in the dim light. The moan sounded again, weaker this time. Mylo shot an angry glance back at Callie as he heard a gasp in shock. Then he remembered another of his boss's lessons. Distraction could kill faster than carelessness. Mylo crouched lower and turned his attention back to the job in hand. 10 feet. 5. 4. Mylo could hear ragged breathing. 3. Mylo lay flat in the cold, ice-frosted mud and inched the last 2 feet. A man lay in what was once the main living area of the old farmhouse. The man's pale complexion and raven hair told of his nationality. He was Imerian, a countryman of Callie's. His chainmail was torn in several places, and Mylo could see dried blood on his body through the rents in the armor. A sword lay unsheathed near his right hand, and a loaded crossbow was on his chest, pointed towards the farmyard. The man's left hand grasped the crossbow's trigger, and a simple clenching of his fist would shoot the bolt. "Hey," Mylo whispered. There were no signs of a response from the man, so Mylo spoke a little more loudly. This time the man turned his head towards where Mylo was hidden. "Don't shoot," he said firmly. "We're friends." The man half smiled, then broke into a racking spasm of coughs again. Mylo bolted from his hiding place and ran to the fallen man. The coughing had wrenched the man's chest, and blood was spreading slowly through a split in his mail. "Callie!" Mylo shouted. "He's one of your men. Get over here now." Callie ran to Mylo's side. "Sergeant Astle!" the girl cried as she recognized the man who had lashed her horse away from the battle and, in doing so, had saved her life. Without a second thought, she removed her riding cloak and covered the sergeant, who was now shivering horribly. "Mylo, get the water canteen and saddle blanket from the horse," she ordered in a firm, commanding voice. Politeness and manners were proper and ladylike, her mother and tutors would say, but sometimes even they took second place, and this was one of those times. Mylo darted away and returned scant moments later. Callie had torn strips from her dress and was using them to stanch the sergeant's bleeding. He handed her the water canteen and laid the blanket over the wounded man. "Thank you," Callie said curtly, not all her manners forgotten, and she washed the blood from the wound before placing the dry strips from her torn dress over the jagged cut. A weak smile formed on the sergeant's lips. He mouthed a thanks before his eyes closed. "Is he?" Mylo began. "No," Callie replied, "but I fear he's not far off. I'm not a physician, Mylo. We need better help than I can give him. We'll have to get him back to Pessard's Ford." Mylo looked doubtful. "Not a chance, Callie. Just putting him on the horse might reopen that chest wound and he'll bleed to death. Besides, it'll be dark soon, and I wouldn't be surprised if we're knee-deep in snow before midnight." "We have to try, Mylo," insisted Callie. "This man saved my life and almost lost his." Mylo looked down at the sergeant and thought. Callie could ride back to the village and bring help, but she didn't know the area as well as he did and would surely get lost when night fell. He could make it to the village, but there was no way he could leave Callie alone with darkness pressing in. That left one possibility. "Goody Bamba," he said. Callie raised a questioning eyebrow. "She's a herbalist. She knows some medicine. Some say Goody Bamber is some sort of seer. I think she's a bit crazed, but I know she soothed my mother's pains when she was giving birth to me. A seer, Callie said with some distaste. My people might call her a witch. Could you consign the sergeant into the care of someone like that? Witch, seer, midwife, or healer? Mylo replied. Call her what you will. I call her our only chance of saving the sergeant's life. Callie knelt down by the soldier. Sergeant Astle, she said gently, we're going to move you to a safer place. I'm sorry, but this will be painful. Together, Mylo and Callie half carried, half dragged the soldier to the horse. With considerable effort, they sat him on the animal and tied him to the stirrups and saddle bow. How long will this take? Callie asked, her voice loaded with concern and fear. Mylo turned back to the girl, carefully pointing the loaded crossbow away from her. For you and I on foot, I'd say about an hour. Carrying the sergeant like this, with stops to let you check the dressings, more like 3 hours. There you go. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Okay, so Colin organises the technical side of this live stream, so many thanks to him for that. And let's please have another round of applause for Colin A Brett and Mylo.
Thank you.
Okay, so today we have 3 new readers for you, and our next reader this afternoon is Alan, and he's published many books and short stories, but tonight, or this afternoon rather, he's going to bring us some poetry. And we don't just let anybody read poetry here, because it is Fiction Fix. So please mute yourself during the reading, but will you please first show your appreciation for Alan Ashley, the current president-elect of the Fantasy Society, with some poems from his latest book, Echoes from an Expired Earth. Ooh, come in.
Thank you. A quick thank you to Gordon, Tricia, Margaret, and Lawrence. Lawrence, I haven't seen you for ages, and Clint, who've all responded to my email and turned up. Yeah, I'm actually president of the BFS now, not president-elect. I've actually been elected.
Oh, wow. Even better.
There we go. Even better, yeah, even more onerous. Right, okay, so I'm going to be reading some poems from Echoes from an Expired Earth. This came out in Kindle last year, came out in paperback this year. And this is the opening poem. This is called Sometimes. Sometimes I hear them on the floor above, dragging around heavy weights that could be human corpses. She soothes me, tells me they are musicians with outsized instruments, cellos, a double bass, yet I've never heard them play. Sometimes I hear them communicating in a harsh, guttural language, demonic, diabolic. She agrees that it's a primitive tongue, but one recognized by the European Commission. To me, at best, they are extras from a film by Hammer or Amicus. To her, at best, I'm a trifle xenophobic. I haven't worked in a while. I'm at home for most of the day, but I know that I live on the top floor and remember examining the attic space, crawling on all fours, head banging the beams, not enough room to swing a small cat, alive or dead. Then she says, silly man, have you forgotten the loft conversion carried out by our avaricious landlord? She may be right, but how and why is she telling me these things? I never married. I've always lived alone. Thank you. The next one is called My Stepsisters. My stepsisters are not my blood. I clean their clothes, I bring them food, I work just how a servant should. I do all that their sneers expect, sweep out the fire, scrub the steps. My stepmother barks out the orders, do my duty to her daughters, brush their hair and wash their quarters. I wish my father weren't so mild and spoke up for his only child. First stepsister is aiming regal with golden locks, that smell like treacle, but voice of an expired seagull. She snores just like a dinosaur. He'd never want to wake beside her. The other one has spider eyes, mascaraed gaze upon the prize, with pumped up boobs and spray tanned thighs, cheap cosmetics, hair extensions. He won't be fooled by her pretensions. One day, I'll face them with the shock of who was in that silken frock, sent barefoot home by ticking clock, with one glass shoe left clue behind her, still waiting for her prince to find her. Thank you. Thanks very much. What a great audience. I'm billed on the schedule as SF poetry, sort of very, very broadly, but this is an SF poem. This is called Thames Astronautics. Thames Astronautics have turned up in our solar system to shore things up for the next 100 years or so. Every morning we hear their rockets and launch craft bursting the air and rumbling the earth, or see their huge cranes allowing operatives to shine up the stars, dust Saturn's rings, and read the Mercury on Mercury. Jupiter's red spot seems to be responding to treatment and is shrinking perceptibly. They've still not found life on Mars. There's frozen water, trace elements, carbon dioxide, and sand. We have asked the site manager not to fill in the holes on the moon. We like our craters just as they are. Thank you.
That's brilliant.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you. A slightly more serious one to follow. This is called Because a Tree. This one was actually brand new to the collection, so not been previously published in any magazines or journals. Because a tree. Because a tree gives us fruit, timber, knowledge, shelter. Rooted for years, it marks our childhood, our sweethearts, our boundaries. Each one its own ecosystem. It's feeding the 5,000 insects, birds, squirrels, storing away our carbon and breathing out O2 too. Because a tree supposedly tempted and later formed a burden to be carried, nailed upon, left. Ill-used through the eons, the hull of the slave ships, the handle of the muskets, the frame for the guillotine, and right square on the gallows. Redwood, sequoia, oak, 150 not out, no stumping allowed. Because a tree lives above and below, holds its ground and ours through slings, arrows, and cyclones, is there before us and after us. Thank you. Thank you. Right, we're now going to attempt screen share. So let's see. You should be seeing a picture, a painting by Evelyn de Morgan.
Yes.
Yeah. Lovely.
Yeah,
okay.
Beautiful.
This painting inspired this next poem. The painting is Ariadne in Naxos, painted in 1877 by Evelyn de Morgan. If you know your Greek mythology, you will know that Theseus traveled to Crete and entered the labyrinth to kill the Minotaur. Ariadne was the princess of the king of, the daughter of the king of Crete, and she helped Theseus by giving him a ball of golden thread to enable him to find his way out of the labyrinth. So having killed the Minotaur, Theseus and Ariadne set off together, but then later he literally dumped her on an island in the Mediterranean called Naxos. So we see her here. Often she's portrayed in a frenzied rage, but here Evelyn shows her after her rage has subsided, solitary and desolate, her red robes conveying the idea of martyrdom. I wrote the poem inspired by this painting. I do love my Greek mythology. And then later I found another painting by John Atkinson Grimshaw from the very same year, Ariadne at Naxos. And this one possibly fits my poem even more. So I'll sort of keep them up. I'll keep this one up while I read the poem. This is called Ariadne on Naxos, Certificate PG. Starring Billie Holiday. I've got a right to sing the blues. I don't want to cry anymore. He treats me awful mean. Lover, come back to me. My man don't love me. Don't explain. Hush now, stormy weather. I must have that man. I only have eyes for you, the man I love. I want the world to know just what the blues is all about. It's that old devil called love. He's funny that way, my funny Valentine. In my solitude, you haunt me. Traveling light, I cover the waterfront. Starring Dusty Springfield. Stay a while. I only want to be with you. I'll try anything. I close my eyes and count to 10. I just don't know what to do with myself if you go away. You don't have to say you love me. Wishing and hoping in the middle of nowhere, how can I be sure? Anyone who had a heart, stay a while. Numaki Tapa. Starring Gloria Gaynor and Thelma Houston. I will survive. Don't leave me this way. Thank you. Okay.
Oh, that was fun.
Thank you. We're not supposed to have favourites, but that
I love those kind of poems.
Right. We're not supposed to have favourite, but that has been my favourite poem for some time. So, okay. So following on nicely for that, feel free to sort of tap along with this one. This will be my last poem. This is called I Still Survive. So feel free to join in, and I will indicate that when it's finished. So this is I Still Survive.
Okay.
Yes, I was afraid. Really petrified, thinking, how was I to live when everyone had died? Spending oh so many nights, thinking how it all went wrong. I wasn't strong, but I just had to carry on. It was a germ from outer space. It left us unable to breathe with green spots upon our face. Oh, I hate that stupid pox and what it's done to me. I've broken all my mirrors. I just can't bear to see. Still I must go, walk through the door. Don't turn back now. No one lives here anymore. Catastrophe, destroying human pride. The buildings crumble. Everyone laid down and died, but no, not I. I still survive. Keep looting from the local shops just to stay alive. Tins of beans and cans of soup, bottled water gives me hope that I'll survive. I still survive. Hey, hey, instrumental bit. It's so hard to stay awake, but so hard to sleep. Smelling all the rotting corpses littering the street. I spent a lot of nights feeling sorry for myself. I used to cry, but now I curse the starry sky. If you see me, please say how do. Don't wave a pistol in my face or a can of special brew. Each Adam needs an Eve. That's what I do believe. Are you alive? Did you survive? Hey, hey. That's it. Thank you very much to Steve for dancing along to it as well. I'll have to take you to every gig.
I just couldn't help myself, sorry.
That was brilliant.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for that, Alan, because that was a real eye-opener. All of it. Okay, so, right, well, please make some more noise for Alan Ashley and Echoes from an Expired Earth. Woo!
Thank you.
Yay! Right, now we welcome Amanda, who has read on Fiction Fix Online before. So now it's time for your hands to work again as we welcome back Amanda Reed and her exciting novel, Lost and Waiting. Please mute yourself during the reading, but I hope you enjoy this. Yes, fabulous.
Hi there. I'll just give you a quick setup because we're quite deep into the novel here. So Evangeline, with the help of Jesus and loyal hound Florito, is on a quest to find the mythical world tree. In her way is the ruthless Leo Winepress, head of Chilean oil company Chesmu. His plan to lay a Transandean oil pipeline, otherwise known as TAP, through forest has ignited protests. Evangeline and friends have just arrived in their van at the protest site. The thup, thup, thup of a helicopter roared overhead. Its logo, an orange number 13, was enough for Jesus to identify it as belonging to Teletrece, a Chilean news network. A delicious ripple of expectation swept through Evangeline. The world was waiting. Shesmu would have to back down under all this publicity, if only to limit reputation damage. It was strange then that so many of its logging vehicles were still deployed. Many had acquired the slogan #ScrapTheTap in fluorescent paint. A flare arced through the sky, illuminating a swelling mass of people. Another helicopter thundered overhead, this one larger, more rugged, and nose to tail in canary yellow. Closing in, the aircraft dropped low and turned to stare down the gathering. The protesters shielded their eyes against the turbulence, the helicopter's thrum not quite obliterating the shouts and screams of the crowd. At the last minute, the craft swooped up over people and trees, rounded on itself, and circled above the crowd. Below in the van, Jesus wrenched on the handbrake and grabbed the camera. Evangeline intended to Florito in the vehicle, but he was having none of it. He had a point. Dogs must never be left alone in vehicles. She let Florito out and said, "Stay close and don't get into trouble." They caught up with Jesus, chatting to a chic woman with a sweep of grey in her dark hair, wearing a silk scarf tied in a side knot. The woman nodded a smile to Evangeline before melting into the crowd. Jesus explained, the loggers have been ordered to carry on regardless of the danger to the protesters. Ordered? Who ordered? Said Evangeline. Winepress. It's him in the helicopter. On cue, the helicopter beamed a searchlight at the windswept protesters. Stark white, shade black, dazzled by the glare, the crowd wavered. Ladies and gentlemen, a voice echoed from a loud hailer. Shesmu represents the many law-abiding, hard-working Chileans who deserve a better Chile. The crowd jeered and moved clear of the forest. It was a matter of stand up and be counted. While you've been enjoying your jamboree, the helicopter continued, Shesmu has held discussions with the government. I have today personally pledged profits from the pipeline to support the recruitment and retention of school teachers. But I didn't stop there. Shesmu will inject $3 million funding into the health service. Evangeline wondered whether these promises would be enough to turn the protesters. The Soigné woman they'd met earlier, perhaps. You're killing the forest, a voice came out of the crowd. Snapped from their trance, the crowd surged again. Keep your oily dollars, Weimar said another. Chile's better off without you. As the protesters resisted the bribes, a glow of warmth filled Evangeline. The helicopter's loud hailer spoke once more. This is a criminal act of trespass and vandalism. Leave the area immediately. The craft ascended and flew out of sight, followed by a roar from the crowd. After the dazzling beam of the helicopter, it took a moment to adjust to the twilight. So the crowd didn't notice straight away the wall that had not been there before. 2 meters high, it formed a perfect square. They were surrounded. The wall of riot shields, embossed with the TAP squad insignia, shouted, "Advance!" Pace by regimented pace, it closed in. Each riot shield produced an arm bearing a truncheon. Each truncheon beat out the pace on its shield. Within this square, Evangeline sought for and found Jesus' hand and felt his squeeze of reassurance. Between them, Florito rumbled like a chainsaw in slow-mo. The crowd came together, shouting, blaring klaxons, long projectiles towards the barricade, pushing forward. In the crush, Evangeline's hand slipped from Jesus' hold and she's lost sight of him. The tap squad launched a rain of canisters which spewed a green-white gas, silencing those enveloped. As the sour-smelling fog rolled towards her, a heart-imploding pain in her chest brought her to her knees. Beside her, Florito retched, his eyes streaming. Unable to keep her own eyes open for the burning pain, all she could do was fold herself over his head, shielding him from the gas. Around her, the crowd scattered. Dull thuds and yells came from all directions. Evangeline guessed those that ran to the barricade were met with violence. Bit by bit, the gas cleared and the pain subsided. Evangeline stood and wiped her eyes just in time to see the soignée woman of earlier, her skirt now rucked up to the hips, being dragged along the ground by 3 of the tap squad in riot gear. Blood streamed from a wound in the woman's head. Adrenaline pumping, Evangeline threw herself on the back of a guard, locked her arms around his neck and clung on. His smell of sweat and cheap aftershave burnt her raw throat. He could not rid himself of her while also holding the other woman. He dropped his hold and withdrew what looked like a small gun from his pocket. The woman was about to die. Instead, clicking and barbs of pain, a taser shot through Evangeline. She screamed in agony. Muscles no longer under control, her grip loosened and she fell to the ground, legs in spasm. A jackboot knocked the air from her. Florito had taken on the other 2 guards. His jaws clamped on an arm and tugged. The man yelled. His accomplice brought down a truncheon on the hound's head, but Florito would not let go. Snarling, he worried that arm. The first guard had joined in hammering down blows on Florito's back, and more guards piled in. Evangeline scrambled to her feet, pulled the woman free, and turned on the men. "Stop! Leave him alone!" Salvaging a wooden pole from the ground, she jabbed at their backs, across their heads. It fractured on contact with their body armour. An elbow in the face swatted her away. The men's bloodlust focused on the snarling hound. Through their legs, she glimpsed his flanks covered in gore and the pinkish spittle frothing from his jaws. Guards swarmed around him, kicking, beating. Blocked from view, his growl became ragged, desperate, and then no more. The guards picked up their fallen comrade and took him away. One of them, his visor raised, glanced back over his shoulder, sniggered, and put one last boot in. Florito lay still. She crawled to the body, wrapped her arms around his neck, and breathed in his biscuity smell. "Why didn't you stay in the van?" "Thank you. Just to say, no dogs were harmed in the making of this novel."
Okay, so please give a big hand for Amanda Reed and Lost and Waiting. Very exciting little episode there. Right, so next up is Nat, who is...
No.
Oh no!
Oh no!
You're going to be fine, darling.
Yeah, you will. So Nat is in the throes, of preparing her first novella for publication. So I would like to introduce Nat Whiston and her novella, She Becomes Death, which is a fabulous title, I think.
Thank you. I'm a little bit nervous. I do apologise. I haven't done this in a while. So, just to make it work. Everyone hated her for what she stood for, and they feared her very presence. For to see her was to shed their mortal coil and move on into the unknown, making them feel helpless, knowing the inevitable was upon them and no form of bargaining or begging would stop their judgment. They trembled in fear at the very sight of the dark figure. Death was no friend, nor was she an enemy, just part of the natural course that life eventually takes. She's accepted being loathed and even hated. It was nothing personal. And this was just the role that had been assigned to her. Her next task had just begun, standing over the bloody, mangled remains of a man who'd been in a car accident. His soul lingers, frozen over his body. After being thrusted through the windshield, he now has his lifeless body lying before him on the asphalt, unable to look away from the remnants of the man he used to be. On seeing the dark spectre, his look of confusion turns to terror. The hooded figure floats over to his side and looks at him with a blank expression, which only unnerves him more. "It's time to go, John," she states plainly. "How do you know my name?" "I know everyone's name," Death answers solemnly. "But I don't want to go," John protests. "My wife and child, they're still in the car." In his urgency, he goes running towards the wreckage, but a cold hand around his wrist stops his advances. "They're fine, John, I promise. But you don't belong here anymore." The words hit the man harder than the collision, and he wasn't ready to go with her. He had a life to live, a family to provide for. John was determined to put up a fight. He snatches away from her grasp viciously. "Didn't you hear me? I'm not leaving, damn it!" he screamed in Death's face. She has witnessed many outbursts of denial over the years, and over time has learned how to deal with the stages of grief. This was no different of any of those instances. "How would you get back?" she asks. The question lingers in the air like a bad smell, and he realizes he has no answer for her. "Your body won't function and your heart no longer beats. If you stay, it's only to wander the earth alone." Her hand gently rests on his shoulder, and he rests his hand on hers. "Where will I go?" "Somewhere better than here," Death answers, "and you will see your family again." The promise and the smile on her pale lips was enough of a comfort for John, and he was ready. He takes Death's hand willingly, and they wander into the darkness leading to limbo, where John would face his judgment and find his place on the other side. After leading John to the afterlife, Death returned to the mortal realm, or more subtly, Coventry. She understood what it meant to be the Grim Reaper, to walk alone in solitude, slowly, day by day, losing her humanity. She knew eventually any memory of who she was before death. Lost in her thoughts while walking the grounds, she suddenly notices a man standing over by the headstone, gazing upon her. It's when he moves in closer to inspect her that catches Death's attention. Death can only be seen by those close to death, or even at the end of their time. She stands puzzled at the dashing stranger, looking upon her, eyes full of wonder and curiosity. But now she finds herself intrigued. How does he see me? Her attire wasn't exactly inviting. I mean, in the middle of July, in a costume that could be that of Halloween, she didn't exactly not stand out. The black cloak, the wispy black dress that fanned out around her, and the thick corset latched over the top, fixed into place. Her face fashioned like a Day of the Dead mask. Her every presence should have unfazed him, but it didn't. She wanders over to the man with piercing blue eyes and begins to circle him. "I feel like a fish being circled by a shark," he suddenly comments, startling Death, which in itself is an achievement. "How do you see me?" she asks. The man shrugs nonchalantly. "There's no smell of death anywhere near you." She sniffs the air around him, which makes him chuckle in amusement. No matter how hard she breathes in the air, all she can smell is the fresh cologne from the stranger and the sweet aroma intoxicating her. She eventually regains her focus. The whole situation is very bizarre to her. She came here day after day, centuries, here to Coventry, and not once have they ever crossed paths. This is her private place, a place she finds solitude to remind herself of her humanity that is constantly dwindling and fading throughout the centuries. Remembering her past to keep the sliver of emotion she still has, wandering alone amongst the ruins of long forgotten time. But this time she wasn't alone. Her first living company in a long time now stands by a grave with a bunch of half-dying roses. The man sighs heavily before placing them delicately to the headstone. Worn and faded by time, Death gazes around and sees every grave, no matter how damaged or degraded, a set of roses resting next to them. No one deserves to be forgotten, especially not the dead, he proclaims before standing up. How about I come back tomorrow when you're less distracted? He says, brushing off his knees and walking away. Death looks perplexed. Well, wait a minute. The man pauses for a moment before turning back to it. Who are you? Oh, I'm sorry, my name's Ben. He just turns on his heels and departs towards the bridge, leaving the grounds and the ruins entirely. The encounter left Death standing confused by the gravestone, and she shakes her head as if to remove the interaction from her mind before disappearing into a cloud of black smoke. She still had much work left to do, and she had to forget this Ben character that had just come into her life. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the vision of the dark-haired man out of her mind. It made it hard for her to focus on tasks at hand. She decided the only way to move beyond it was to go back to the cemetery and to meet Ben once more. Thank you.
Okay, that was brilliant. So let's hear it again for Nat Whiston, and she becomes the Death. Okay. And now we have another new reader, Steve, who has previously published a novel and is now working on something completely different. So please mute yourselves during the reading. But first, please give a warm welcome to S.G. Mulholland as he reads from his current, sorry, teeth won't work. It's from his current work in progress, The Luck of Puck.
Thanks very much, everyone. Just want to give everybody a bit of context about this series. Just a series of short stories and novelettes set in an alternate timeline where elves and fairies and all the mythical creatures of the world have returned back to the human world, and it's about a particular rascal and scallywag who a lot of people who have read him seem to like, by the name of Robin Goodfellow, or Puck as he's known. This particular story, the part that I'm going to read you, is an excerpt, and it takes place after the prologue. So if it's a little bit out of joint, I do apologise, but I will do my best as I'm very, very nervous right now. Okay. So, The Luck of Puck. The Maltings Pub, the city of York, present day. Puck opened his weak and bleary eyes and tried as best as he could to peer through his wild mane of blood-red hair. His whole body throbbed and cracked with each tiny exertion he made. He was parched. His tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth as he wiped drool from his lips with the back of his hand. He noted with detached and inebriated interest that he recognized the floor he had come face to face with. The oak wooden panels of the Maltings Pub were boon companions of the once great fairy warrior. These last few decades, when other friends had long since turned their backs, the floors of the Maltings Pub were always there to catch him. But there was more than just the cold, hard surface of the floor. Brushing against his fair skin was something soft and warm. Feeling beneath his face, he pulled out a stuffed toy dragon and looked at it in confusion. It took him a moment to recall, but he'd seen the soft and scaly fellow before. "Troilus," he said hoarsely, his voice cracked and rough from a hard night's drinking. "Oh, what brings you to my bedside?" The dragon gave no answer, not that it could, but instead just stared at him with a goofy, lopsided grin in silence. Puck had no inclination to ask any further questions of the toy, but instead decided to rid himself of the plague of the hangover currently storming his body. Puck hated hangovers almost as much as he hated being drunk, but there was one thing he hated even more than that: the memories. Deciding at first that getting upright was the first challenge to overcome, he pushed himself into a seated position. This proved far more challenging than he had first anticipated, as his hangover punched him square between the eyes with lightning precision. So terrible was the pain that it knocked him back to the floor. Puck felt his stomach begin to turn as the filthy kebab he ate last night began to demand immediate attention. With great pain and agony, he rolled onto all fours and used all the force of willpower he had to stop his dinner from escaping. "You hurl on that dragon, you can forget ever coming in here again." He recognized the voice immediately, and he knew he was in trouble. A pair of black leather cowboy boots appeared in front of him, followed by a bright red plastic bucket. Cautiously, he glanced upwards and saw a young, platinum blonde alpha, or elf, as the Humes called them, staring down at him furiously. Her eyes were golden brown, and her pointed ears twitched with rage. Puck was definitely in trouble now. "You do your business in that. You've lost your toilet privileges, you hear me?" she said, her voice ringing with venom and the faint luster of her Elysium accent. He nodded only slightly, but that was enough for the kebab to finally make its getaway. The vomit tasted foul and sweet in his mouth as chunks of meat and bread and vegetables forced its way upwards and out into the bucket. A few minutes later, and half a bucket later, he had started to feel mildly better. He even managed to push himself to his feet and stay upright, albeit on shaky legs. But that did nothing to aid his recovery. Taking a few tentative steps towards the bar, he planted himself and put his head in his hands. The relief he was feeling the relief he felt was fleeting as a moment later, the alpha pushed his elbows out from under him, causing his face to smack off the bar. The cold wood hit him like concrete, causing yet more pain. "Ow! For fuck's sake, Serenia! I know I was pretty drunk last night, but there's every need for it, you bastard! You have no clue what kind of anarchy follows you around," she snapped. Puck wanted to tell her she was wrong, but the truth was that he, more than anyone, was so painfully aware of just what his life was like. Things had never been boring for Puck, and to most that might have seemed like the ideal life, but in his opinion he was cursed. In his time both in Elysium and in Gaia, or Earth as the humans called it, he had been many things, most of them horrifying. For nearly 300 years, Puck had been a sorcerer, an artist, a musician, a warrior, a general, a lover, a leader, and a king. But most recently, a terrible gambler, and worst yet, a drunk. Most humans knew him as the Beast of Cuba, the Devil of Dallas, and the Bearer of the Wild Horns. All names sounded dramatic, but none of them truly summed up just how much they all hated him. Cold hard slap across his right cheek brought him out of his self-pitying daydream and nearly sent him back to the floor. "Shit, what did I do this time?" he whined. "I don't care if you fuck up your life, Puck. You've had close on 300 years to grow up, but I swear by the great tree, if you drag my son along with you, then there's no protection spell yet forged that can shield you from me." He knew in that moment he had well and truly fucked up. Serenia was nothing if not forgiving, a rarity amongst the alphas. But when it came to her adopted son, she had the instincts of a wild, rabid cat baring its claws. Even in his current state, Puck was smart enough to take care with each word he let loose from now on, and not let his tongue do too much of his thinking for him. Oh God, what happened? Errol bought you that dreamstone for solstice. Worked at the Kelpie Ranch by Skeldergate Bridge, literally scooping Kelpie shit out of the ouse, just so he could buy you that stone so you could get a good night's sleep, she said. Her voice flushed with maternal fury. Puck could not possibly feel worse. Not only was his hangover refusing to dissipate, but the night's events were beginning to return to him. It had started out pleasant enough, with a meal at the Golden Fleece and a few Dwerga's whiskies with Saul, the resident skeleton and information broker. From there, he worked his way steadily through every pub from the shambles to the other side of the Ouse. But by the time he got to the maltings, he was nearly out of guineas. It was here where things began to get hazy. He recalled a mahjong set and a few blurry faces, but beyond that, his memory had truly been wiped clean by the whiskey. Only one image poked through the fog in his brain, and that was the look of pure heartache scrawled across the young boy's face. It was all Puck could do to stop himself from breaking down and crying. I'll make it up to him. I swear by the great tree, Puck said hurriedly. Serenia crossed her arms and regarded him contemptibly. Really? What do you plan on doing to make it up? Because he's upstairs refusing to come down. I'll take him to see the Manatol. Maybe see if we can spot the dragon on the North Sea, he said with a lopsided smile. Serenia was thoroughly unimpressed. If anything, she looked even angrier than before. So that's it, is it? Couple of trips out to places he's already going with his school as part of his Mythics history class. Well done, genius. Very inspired, she said. She placed both hands flat on the bar and leveled her face with his own, staring deeply into his mismatched eyes of blue and green. Now you listen here, Robin Goodfellow, she said. Puck knew this was serious. Most folk did not know his real name, and only those closest to him would dare speak it in the way Serenia was. You're going to go out into the city, but I don't care what you have to do or how you do it, but you're going to get that dreamstone back. You're going to bring it here so Errol can see that his hero isn't the worthless piece of shit we all know him to be. Thank you.
Woo! Okay, well that was epic.
No. to be fair, Helen, you put me in a really bad position because I had to follow everybody else's work, and that's not something easy to do.
I think you made a really good fist of it, honestly. I really do. So don't put yourself down.
Thank you.
So yes, let's please all show our appreciation for SG Mulholland and the luck of Puck. Okay, there's trouble here. Okay, so I'm going to close the festivities with a reading from the Zardoth Imperative Clanship. This is my current work in progress, or one of two, because it was a huge book, but I split it. So we revisit chapter 7, where last month, Hardy was on a recce on Declane when he saw the Zardothi children marched in chains into the prison camp by Kiai guards. And Mill was in that group. He hoped to see his parents again, but was worried that they wouldn't be there. And Red Hempel, she's in charge of the Earth Fleet, learned that the Bekel had been boarded, and this led her to agree to work with the Zardothi commander Vagar Hesdats. Little bit of vocabulary to give you a heads up on. The Shiroli, that's the Zardothi word for the pregnant ladies of the clan, and they're left in charge of the clanship when the warriors go off to fight and complete their contract. So that word will crop up. Calling Zardothi ship Velacta. Come in, Velacta. The message was in the language of IR's human friends and used the laser comms system IR had supplied. Omol hadn't had an opportunity to try that out yet. Should I answer? He asked Afdar. Afdar gestured to him to do so. Omol played the controls of the new system. This is Omol Fadaifa speaking, currently of the Velacta. This is Red Hempel of the Challenger 2. What is the location of the Bekel? Challenger 2, I am not authorised to give you that information. Omol considered for a moment before adding, even if I were, if you really want it, you'd have to attack the Kiai for it. A new voice spoke, sounding more distant. Red Hempel, this is Vagar Hesdats of the Kameen. Acknowledged. Acknowledged, Vagar. Omol adjusted the focus on his system to include the Velacta. You shouldn't even be thinking on those lines now. Follow the plan we agreed to rendezvous with the Velacta and us, as discussed, while we plan how to attack the Voth fleet and their installations on Declaim. There was a sigh, clearly audible over the three-way channel. Have it your way, Vagar, but it's still a mission objective for me. We understand that, but it must come after we've defeated the Voth. That's our joint priority, Zardothi and human. Otherwise, they'll be headed your way next. Precisely, Omol added. Afdar stepped over to Omol's communications console. Let's work together to destroy the Voth first and then negotiate the question after. That is, after all, what we agreed in the first place. So, are you a woman of your word? Vagar didn't wait for her reply, just chuckled. I like your laser comms, Earthwoman. Just widen the beam to include more recipients, but don't let the Voth get hold of them. Hardy Brencher checked the dunes, the horizon, and the sky for Kiai troopers. All were empty. He crept up to the shuttle, opened the hatch, and slid inside in an easy movement. A quick check of the sim tank confirmed he was alone in the infinity of sand and scrub. He judged it safe to take off. The same course back that was programmed in would take him to the Bekel and probable captivity. But there was just enough fuel to get him to Zeret Kachav, and staying in orbit around Declaim would expose him to detection and capture for longer. He judged that keeping the planet between himself and the Voth fleet would be a better idea and set about planning a route for Zeret Kachav on that basis. It would also mean he could use the laser comms system, if necessary, with no fear of detection. He settled himself in the pilot's seat and felt it mould itself around him. He pulled the headset down into place, switched on the engines and thought, lift off, as IR had shown him. The shuttle lifted without difficulty and ploughed through the ruined atmosphere. Hardy hoped the shuttle was small enough that the Voth couldn't detect it, but didn't think that was possible. He kept a close eye on the sim tank. The Voth fleet looked to have stayed put, and the Bekel hadn't moved from its orbit. That was good. The Velacta was still hitching a ride between Zeret and Kachav, which was also good. His plan depended on that. Hardy decreased the resolution of the sim tank so it showed the whole solar system as number 3 shuttle zoomed around Declaim's limb, following the night side of the planet. There was no sign of pursuit. It looked as if he were in the clear. He exhaled with relief and headed for open space. But there was something odd in the sim tank. As the volume of space it covered increased, 3 red dots and a 4th white one appeared, heading straight for Zeret Kachav. Weird. What are they up to? Hardy murmured aloud. The Kameen, followed by the 3 Earth ships, was heading straight for the Zeret Kachav system. He shook himself. No use wishing for what can never be. But if I want to see Josie or any of them again, I'd better get a message to Afdar and Omol, because it's down to me now. And now into chapter 8. Mill's eyes darted here and there as he scanned the crowd of ragged Zardothi prisoners. None of them looked familiar. Panic rose in him. For some reason, the Zardothi kept away from the other prisoners. Mill couldn't begin to guess why. He walked a little closer to the knot of Zardothi and scanned again. His strange dreams flooded through his mind in minute detail as he tried to remember what his parents looked like. After a few thousandths, he noticed that some of his friends from the ship had gravitated towards one or other of the adults. There was Rel. He'd found his mother, though Mill didn't recognise her. He looked around him. Ayar stood alone, surveying the crowds as he was. So did Halka, flanked by Robert. But Kaj shyly approached a lone female. She did look familiar, even to the metal shape at the side of and just below her lower lip. Mill remembered that all the adults had them, but couldn't remember why. From what he knew of Earth customs, he guessed it was some sort of piercing. As he drew closer, he saw that Kaj's mother was pointing excitedly to her. Mill watched as she put down her hand. A ragged purplish-brown scar puckered the skin of her throat. Her translator had been ripped out. Kaj's mother was mute. Where is Kaj's father? Mill shivered. 100 questions crowded into his mind. If Kaj's father was dead, how had he died? Mill remembered how the Shiroli had died on the Bekel, and another shiver belied the heat in the compound. He felt a hand on his shoulder and looked round. Devan was there, accompanied by her husband Jafar. He was good looking for a human with expressive eyes. He smiled at Mill. Can you see them? Mill asked. Devan shook her head. But there's a shift working in the mine now, according to the Ki. You talk to the guards? Yes, they could be back later. But will they remember me? Mill wondered. And will I recognise them? Thank you very much. And thank you for your patience.
Well done, Helen. Bravo.
Marathon, wasn't it?
Oh, we got there in the end.
Thank you so much.
Well done, despite
cliffhanger.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bloody
Okay,
good.
so. Oh, it's all right. We managed to finish now. Thank you. So I hope you enjoyed that. And many thanks to all our lovely authors and readers. And that's Alan, Amanda, Nat and Steve for joining Colin and myself. And thank you so much to all our lovely friends and family studio audience for joining us and supporting our readers today. If you'd like to stay and join our chat with the authors after we finish, you are most welcome to join us. So thanks to our friends and family as well. Authors, don't forget to include links to your books on Kindle and so on in the chat, or send them to me afterwards and I'll post them on my timeline in the Finger on the Pulse and on my YouTube channel, Helen Claire Gould, and on my website, www.zardoth.com. Do include prices, ISBNs or ASINs, and where to get them, and your websites too. This has been Helen Claire Gould, comparing Fiction Fix online and bringing both new and established writers in various fiction genres to your attention. Thank you so much for joining us. Colin and I are taking a break from Fiction Fix online next month. So the next edition is on Sunday, the 10th of October, 4 p.m. till 5:10 p.m.-ish. And I look forward to catching up with you then. Anybody who's been in here today is welcome to join us. And we'll send out a list like we did this time of invites. Poetry Sandwich, my personal live stream, is back on Tuesday, August the 10th. watch out for the poster, which is up in Finger on the Pulse Facebook group already. And please do try to join me. I will definitely be standing up for the poems, but may have to perch on a stool for the fiction part, because it's like about 20 minutes. I'm not sure if I can stand for that long yet. So bye for now. I'm going to stop the stream and the live recording now.